What if a single warning could change a man's fate, yet he chose to ignore it? That was the kind of danger waiting for Eli Hart in the summer of 1878, long before he knew a woman's fire would shape the rest of his life. The wind that blew across Sagebrush Ford carried dust sharp enough to sting the skin. It was a noon-hour wind, hot and harsh, scraping the land until even the mountains looked raw under the pale white sky. Creeks were drying, cattle were thinning, and hope itself felt like something that needed watering. Eli Hart felt that wind inside his bones. At 32, he looked like a man who had ridden through too many hard miles. His face carried lines carved by sun and loss. He stood at the fence of his small ranch, Hart's Draw, staring at the 18 thin cattle wandering in the dust. They were all he had left. If he didn't find a way to drive them north to Cheyenne and sell them soon, the bank in Laramie would take everything. He'd be left with nothing but regret. He turned from the corral and walked toward the small town of Sagebrush Ford. The dust puffed around his boots with every step. The place wasn't much, just a street of old wooden buildings sitting tight against the emptiness of the Wyoming plains. Inside Pike's General Mercantile, the air was thick with the smell of coffee and leather. Agnes Pike, a tough woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, looked at him like she always did. "You're a fool, Eli Hart," she said before he could even speak. "Afternoon, Agnes," Eli answered, tipping his hat. "Just need supplies. I'll settle up soon." "You'll settle up when you bring back a miracle," she snapped. "You think a trail boss, a cook, and 3 hands can drive a herd to Cheyenne? One of those boys is barely old enough to shave." Tommy Birch, the 19-year-old she meant, heard his name and flushed. He tried to hide behind a barrel of nails, but his ears turned so red they might as well have glowed. "I can ride good as any man," Tommy muttered. Hector Ruiz, the blacksmith, walked over carrying a sack of flour on his shoulder as if it weighed nothing. "The boy's heart is strong," he said, "and I can fix anything from a busted shoe to a busted wagon wheel. We've handled worse." "It's not the work I'm worried about," Agnes fired back. "It's the food. You can't drive men for 2 months on hardtack and that poison you call coffee. You need a real cook." Eli exhaled slowly. "I know. But good cooks are taken, and the ones still free would get drunk before they boiled water." Agnes tapped her fingers on the counter. "I heard a rumor. There's a cook at the Galloway house in Dry Willow. Irish woman. Name's Mave O'Rourke. They say she can make a feast out of dry beans and salt pork." Eli felt the first spark of hope he'd felt in weeks. "What's the catch?" "Trouble," Agnes said. "Big trouble. Got thrown out of a fancy hotel in Cheyenne. Temper hotter than a branding iron. Claims she's quick with her tongue and quicker with her skillet. Or bottle. Or knife." Tommy swallowed hard. Hector raised a brow. "A woman cook on a cattle drive?" Hector asked. "That's unusual." "It's bad luck," Tommy whispered with wide eyes. "It's only bad luck if she can't cook," Eli said. "And I'm out of choices." He turned toward the door, determination replacing the weight on his shoulders. "I'm riding to Dry Willow." Agnes sighed. "You don't know what you're doing, Eli." "I know I'm out of time," he said, pushing through the door, but someone else had heard all of this. In the dim corner of the saloon sat a stranger, Vance Calder. His hat hid his eyes, but he missed nothing. He wasn't from town. His clothes were finer, his pistol newer, and his silence darker. He listened as the men spoke of Eli's dry herd, his desperate plan, and the route they'd have to take. Calder smiled, a thin, cold smile. He controlled the water along the northern trail, though no lawman ever rode it down. A desperate man was the easiest kind to push. Eli Hart had just stepped into a much bigger game. By the next morning, Eli rode toward Dry Willow under a punishing sun. The land stretched out in every direction, dry and empty. Dust settled on his hat and shirt until he looked carved from the same pale earth. Dry Willow was barely a town at all, just a few sun-baked buildings holding on beside a dying creek. The Galloway House Hotel sagged like an old tired mule, but he could smell cooking from the kitchen as soon as he rode close. He found her there. Mave O'Rourke was a storm contained inside a woman's frame. Her hair was a wild flame of red tied in a knot that kept escaping. Freckles spotted her face like someone had tossed a handful of sunlight at her, and her green eyes, sharp, alive, unafraid, hit him with more force than the heat outside. She stirred a pot with one hand and chopped onions with the other, moving like the kitchen belonged to her, and she belonged to no one. A trail-dusty cowboy leaned too close to her, smiling greasy. "That stew smells mighty fine, darlin', almost as fine as you." His hand wandered toward her waist. Without turning, Mave blocked him with her skillet. A quick, firm motion. His knuckles slammed into cast iron. He yelped and jumped back. "The food is for paying customers," she said calmly. "I am not on the menu." The man sputtered away. Eli had seen fights start over less. But Mave barely blinked. He stepped forward. "Miss O'Rourke?" She turned, eyes scanning him from boots to hat. "If you're here to complain about the stew, get in line behind the fool with the sore hand." "No, ma'am," he said. "I'm here to offer you a job." He told her everything. The small herd, the long trail, the pay, the risk. When he finished, she crossed her arms. "Why should I ride with a half-starved herd and a crew of men I don't know?" "Because on my drive," Eli said, "your space is your own. No one bothers you." "Not ever." She studied him for a long, silent moment. "There are conditions," she said. "I'm listening. My tools, my rules. I place my bedding where I want. If any man lays a hand on me without welcome, he's fired before he can blink. If you fail to do it, I walk and I take the skillet." "As clear as a mountain stream," Eli agreed. 2 days later, she arrived at Hart's Draw with one carpet bag and more grit than any man he had ever hired. She rebuilt his ruined camp kitchen as if she'd been born for it. Hector watched her with awe. Tommy watched her with fear. Lou Tate, the sour cowboy who joined last, watched with open doubt. But that night, when they tasted her stew, rich, warm, full of life, something quiet changed in the camp. Still, Lou Tate couldn't help himself. "A woman running a chuck wagon," he muttered. "Never thought I'd see the day." Mave didn't even look up from her pot. A man's place is to do his job, not wag his jaw like a loose shutter. Lou lurched to his feet, but Eli's voice cut in hard. "Sit down, Lou." Everyone stilled. "Mave is the boss of this fire," Eli said. "Her word is law here. If you don't like it, take your pay and ride." No one moved. The line was drawn. Far away, Vance Calder heard the news. And he smiled. The trouble coming for Eli Hart had only just begun. What if the storm you feared wasn't the one in the sky, but the one riding straight toward you? Eli Hart learned that truth the hard way the day he found himself trapped between a violent hailstorm, a deadly enemy, and a woman whose courage broke something open inside him. For 8 long days, the herd moved north like a slow river of dust and ribs. The sun burned without mercy. The water holes were scarce. Every mile felt heavier than the last. Eli rode ahead each morning to find water, taking turns with the crew. On the 8th day, it was Mave's turn. She rode beside him with steady calm, scanning the land as if she'd lived her whole life on trails like these. The silence between them was easy, the kind that grows when two people start to understand each other without words. By midday, the sky changed. A strange stillness fell. The air grew thick and heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Dark clouds climbed fast over the plains. Eli pulled his horse to a stop. "Storm's coming." "I feel it too," Mave said. "The air's gone wrong." The first blast of wind was icy, then a low roar rolled across the land. "Hail," Eli said sharply. "We need shelter now." Ahead, he spotted a tiny shack, an old line shelter left by a big cattle outfit years ago. It was the only chance they had. "Ride!" he shouted. They raced toward it as hailstones began to fall, first like pebbles, then like stones. They reached the shack just as the storm exploded. Eli shoved the door open, dragged both horses inside, and slammed it shut behind them. What followed sounded like the sky itself was breaking apart. Hail hammered the tin roof so hard the shack shook like an animal in pain. Mave stood near the window, arms wrapped around herself, watching the white chaos outside. Eli worked to calm the horses, whispering low and steady. For nearly an hour the storm raged. When it finally faded into cold rain, the air inside felt brittle and silent. "You all right?" Eli asked. She nodded weakly. "I've never seen anything like that." The shack was freezing, so Eli coaxed a small fire to life in the rusted stove. They stood beside it, letting the warmth touch their numb fingers. The firelight softened the edges of the cramped space. It made Eli look older, heavier with the weight he carried. "You've seen storms like this," Mave said quietly, "just not this kind." "You're right," Eli answered. He stared into the flames, the truth rising like something he could no longer bury. "I was a cavalry scout," he said. "I thought I'd see the world, thought I'd do something good." His voice was low and steady as he told her about the order he refused. The dawn attack on a Cheyenne winter camp that held families, not warriors. How he chose not to fire. How he caused confusion so some could escape. How he was court-martialed, stripped of honor, and left with nothing but memories that haunted him. "I see their faces," he said. "The ones I couldn't save. Sometimes I feel like I'm still on that snowfield, failing them all over again." Mave listened with a quiet stillness that held more comfort than any words could. She didn't look away, she didn't judge him. When he finished, she finally spoke. "I grew up in Boston," she said softly. "Being Irish meant you were always 3 steps behind everyone else. Folks looked at me like I was dirt. If I wanted to survive, I had to fight for every inch." Quote. She told him about bosses who tried to cheat her, men who tried to corner her, and the hotel manager in Cheyenne who learned the hard way that Mave O'Rourke did not break. She defended herself with the same fierce spirit she used to protect her cooking pots. "They call me dangerous," she said. "All I ever did was protect myself." They stood together in the quiet, the fire casting their shadows on the wall, 2 people shaped by pain and principle. 2 people who understood what it meant to stand alone too long. The storm ended. They rode back toward camp across a field of glittering white hail. But something waited for them. Something far colder than the storm they'd just survived. Fresh hoofprints near camp. Jeb Crow met them with a grim face and a bleeding cow standing beside him. A piece of its ear was missing. Cut clean. Eli's stomach tightened. He knew that mark. Everyone did. "Calder's sign," Hector said. Vance Calder had found them. The tension snapped across camp like a stretched rope. Every man kept a rifle close. Mave worked faster than ever in the tiny camp kitchen, feeding them hot meals as if warmth alone could hold fear back. They reached Cottonwood Creek 2 days later, the only good water for miles. But when they reached the old wooden bridge, they weren't alone. A dozen riders waited on the other side. Vance Calder sat in the middle on a black stallion, dressed like a man who believed he owned the land. Eli rode forward alone. Calder smiled thinly. "Small herd, Hart. Hardly worth the sweat. You want water? Costs $2 a head." "You have no right," Eli said. "My men say I do," Calder replied, "but you can test that if you like." Then the sheriff arrived. Sheriff Doyle Briggs, with a tin star on his vest and fear in his eyes. He pretended to keep peace, but his words were Calder's. "Be smart, Eli. Pay the man." Eli looked at his crew, at Tommy's frightened face, at Hector's steady calm, at Mave and Nell waiting with the wagon. He straightened in his saddle. "We're not paying you a cent," Eli said. Everything changed. Calder rode off slowly with a cold smile. His men followed. Sheriff Briggs vanished without another word. The message was clear. The attack would come. But not here. It would come in the dark. Night fell heavy and silent. Then chaos exploded. Gunfire ripped through the camp. Riders swept in from 3 sides. A blazing torch hit the chuck wagon. Fire roared up like a living beast. The cattle stampeded through the flames. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Tommy Birch ran toward the herd. A shot rang out. He fell. Mave shoved Nell out of the path of a falling wagon wheel and took a brutal hit to her own shoulder. She went down hard. Something inside Eli snapped. He rallied Hector and Jeb. They fought back with fierce, steady fire until Calder's men finally broke and fled, leaving ruin behind. But half the herd was gone. The wagon was ashes. Tommy was dead. Mave was bleeding. The crew was shattered. At dawn, help arrived late. Agnes Pike and townsfolk, carrying rifles in anger. They saw the ruin and heard what Calder had done. "This isn't your fight anymore, Eli," Agnes said. "It's all of ours now." Quote, "They buried Tommy on a hill and retreated to a safe homestead. Mave refused to rest. She lit a fire, gathered supplies from ruins, and fed the broken crew with shaking hands. Then came the town meeting. Sagebrush Ford had been ruled by fear long enough. Calder's cruelty had touched everyone. The people stood in that little chapel and looked to Eli, some with hope, some with anger, but all waiting for direction. Eli walked outside, suffocating under guilt. He blamed himself for everything. Mave found him there, quiet, steady, hurting. "They're fighting for themselves," she said softly. "This fire wasn't lit by you. You just uncovered the truth of it." He turned to her, fear raw in his eyes. "I can't lose anyone else. Not because of me." Mave touched his arm gently. "You don't know what you're doing," she whispered with trembling honesty. "You're putting a mark on yourself to keep us safe." He looked at her, at the worry in her eyes, and for the first time in years he understood something simple and terrifying. He wasn't alone anymore. He reached for her hand, his voice low and fierce. "I know you're mine." He said it like a vow, not a claim of possession, but a promise of belonging. Then he kissed her. The kiss was desperate, full of dust and fear and everything they had both tried to bury. It was a promise made in the dark that neither of them would face this fight alone. When they returned to the chapel, the room fell silent. Eli stepped forward, steady at last. "We can't beat Calder head on," he said. "But we don't have to. We choose the ground. We set the trap." The plan was simple and dangerous. They would lure Calder into the narrow stone throat of Boxed Wash and end this, once and for all. What if the only way to survive was to walk straight into the lion's mouth and trust that the people beside you would not let you fall? That was the choice Eli Hart and the people of Sagebrush Ford made when they prepared to face Vance Calder in the narrow jaws of Boxed Wash. For 2 days, the plan moved quietly through the town, like a whisper carried by the wind. Agnes Pike and Hector Ruiz spread the bait in Sagebrush Ford. They spoke loud enough for the right ears to hear, saying Eli Hart was broken, scared, and trying to sneak his last cattle through Boxed Wash under cover of darkness. It was a lie designed to smell like fear. Calder's spies swallowed it whole. Back at the Sloan granary, Mave O'Rourke worked without rest. Her wounded shoulder throbbed, but she ignored it. She boiled water, tore old flour sacks into bandages, packed food into bundles, filled canteens, and loaded every rifle she could find. She worked with the focus of someone who knew exactly how bad the coming night would be. When the sun set, the small group moved out. Boxed Wash was a narrow canyon of stone walls rising high on both sides. The moon barely reached the ground below. The silence was sharp, like something holding its breath. Jeb Crow and Nell Carter climbed the northern and southern ridges with soot-darkened faces, rifles ready. Bottom of the wash lay scattered with loose shale that could send horses sliding. Lou Tate and the farmers built a makeshift barricade at the far end, a trap waiting for the right moment. Eli checked every position twice. His calm felt different now. It wasn't the calm of a man ready to die. It was the calm of a man who finally understood what he was fighting for. When he reached the eastern entrance, Mave was waiting with a group of older men who would hold the rear. She had soaked the ground earlier, turning the top layer of dust into a hidden slick of clay. Their eyes met in the shadows. There were no speeches, no confessions, just a simple squeeze of hands. "Be safe," he told her. "You too," she whispered. "Don't make me chase you into the next life, Eli Hart." They didn't have to wait long. Just before dawn, the lookout signaled. A large group of riders approached fast. Calder was coming with 20 men, and behind them 6 more with a glint of a tin star. Sheriff Briggs had joined the hunt. The odds were impossible. Eli crouched beside Jeb and Nell on the northern ridge. He watched the riders enter the canyon. Calder rode at the front, confident and smiling. His men spread behind him like wolves closing in for the kill. They passed the clay trap without noticing it. They were exactly where Eli needed them to be. He took aim, not at a man, but at a loose boulder on the canyon wall. He fired. The boulder burst free and crashed to the canyon floor. At that same moment, Jeb and Nell opened fire. Lou Tate's team fired from the southern rim. Bullets echoed through the stone walls. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Panic exploded. Calder's confident march turned into a trap of chaos. "Retreat!" Calder roared. He wheeled his horse around to flee back through the entrance. Then, the clay trap sprung. Hooves hit the slick ground. Horses crashed. Men toppled. Shouts turned into blind terror. For a moment, it looked like victory. Then Eli saw movement on the far ridge. Sheriff Briggs had split off earlier. His men were behind them. Shots crackled across the upper cliffs. Nell cried out and dropped to one knee, clutching her side. A bullet smashed the rocks above Jeb, pinning his leg under falling shale. Down below, Mave saw everything. Without hesitating, she ran straight into the gunfire. "Mave, no!" Eli shouted. But she was already climbing the scree slope, fighting against sliding rocks and sharp pain ripping down her side. She reached Jeb, trying to push the heavy rock off his trapped leg. A bullet grazed her ribs, tearing her shirt and sending blood down her side. But she didn't stop. That sight shattered something inside Eli. His calm turned into a cold, unstoppable force. "Lou!" Eli roared. "Cover the ridge!" Lou Tate and the farmers opened a fierce volley, forcing Briggs's men to duck. Eli struck a match, lit a pouch of damp creek moss, and threw it into the canyon. Smoke exploded, thick and blinding. He threw 2 more. The canyon filled with rolling gray clouds. "Hector, with me!" Eli slid down the cliff, disappearing into the smoke. He moved like a shadow, calm and deadly, until he reached Calder. He tackled him hard, knocking the pistol from his hand. Calder swung wildly, but Eli struck back with steady, brutal force. One punch, then another, then a final blow that sent Calder crashing to the ground unconscious. His men broke. Some surrendered. Others fled on foot. Sheriff Briggs and his remaining riders scrambled away into the rising dawn. The fight was over. But Mave was injured. Eli sprinted up the ridge. She had freed Jeb, but now she was slumping against the rocks, eyes unfocused. Blood soaked her shirt. Her face was pale. Eli caught her as she collapsed. "Mave, stay with me. Please, stay with me." Her eyes fluttered, then closed. Eli's heart cracked open. They carried her back to Sagebrush Ford. Inside the chapel, the town's midwife, Leahy Ames, worked fast and steady. Eli held Mave's hand the entire time, whispering every prayer he never believed he'd say. At last, Leahy pulled the flattened bullet from her side. "It missed the important things," she said. "She's strong. She'll live." Eli bowed his head, tears burning his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt like the world loosened its fist around his throat. While Mave healed, the town stood up. Agnes Pike led a crowd that stripped Sheriff Briggs of his badge. Calder was shackled and taken by the federal marshal from Cheyenne. Confessions poured out. The whole territory learned the truth of Calder's terror. Justice, slow as it was, finally came. Weeks passed. The ranch slowly rebuilt. Eli recovered 12 of the original cattle. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to pay debts, enough to survive winter, enough to start again. Mave healed in Hartstraw, living in the half-built kitchen she designed. The stone foundation rose. The new stove warmed the place. And one cool autumn afternoon, as she kneaded dough at the table, Eli finally spoke the words he had carried for too long. "I don't want to build this place alone," he said softly. "I want a home with you if you'll stay." She looked up at him. The sunlight caught her freckles. A slow, warm smile spread across her face. "I think I'll stay, Eli Hart," she said, "but I'm keeping my knife." This is the West. They kissed again, this time not in fear, but in hope. Hart's Draw became a place of safety, a place where travelers found food, rest, and kindness, a place built by people who had survived fire together, a place where Eli and Mave finally found peace.